So I've made a few assumptions about you based on the fact that you're willing to come to an event like this. Some of them are pretty simple. I assume you've got some challenges to solve in your work. The fact that you're willing to come out for this, I don't know, maybe it's the free barbecue, but I assume you're probably a little more passionate than average. I assume that you'd like to help your teams make a difference. And I assume that you want to increase the value that you and your teams can bring. So those feel like pretty reasonable assumptions, which is why I like to give this talk. So just, let's see, who is actually working in software? Because I aimed this talk at people that are not working in software. Okay, so the majority still are. Let's see, who's, I don't know what the other box would be. Management, leading teams, executive management. Okay, great. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. Okay.
Does that count?
Sure, yeah, there you go. And a quick disclaimer, you'll hear the word business agility a lot today. And I confess I haven't done an exhaustive research into that term, but I was curious. You'll see, I've seen it, certainly if you search, you'll see it pop up in news feeds here and there. And I went to the website that seems to be kind of the hub of this concept. This talk today, I don't think is business agility, but we're saying similar things. So I would say, I think what I'm proposing is compatible with the term business agility, but my take on business agility is that literally they are trying to create a culture where businesses can pivot quickly and respond to change, which everything I'm going to tell you today I think is right in line with that. But what I'm really talking about today is taking a lot of Agile principles and techniques that have traditionally been used in software development and applying them in other spaces. So with that, let's jump in. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the Vice President of Delivery at Veracity Solutions. What that means is I'm in charge of making sure that our teams deliver well and consistently. I'm in charge of practice development. I do a lot of idea and thought leadership with things like this. My background is in software development. So I was a software developer for about 25 years. Started out as just a geek that enjoyed writing code. I got connected with Veracity in about 2005 as a developer. And I was a Veracity consultant for about 5 years. And in those 5 years, well, let's see, that's not true. I actually first bumped into Agile in about 2000, right after the manifesto was signed. And as a developer, you know, I had a lot of ideas bouncing around in my head of how to write code and how teams work and all of this, but I hadn't put them all together. And so when I read the Agile manifesto, I was like, oh, of course. It's like somebody took all those ideas and added a bunch of other good ones and put them in a framework and structured them, and I said, yeah, this just makes sense to me. So that was kind of my first experience with Agile. But then I would say that my first Agile project came in about 2006. It was about the second or third project that I worked on with Veracity as a developer. And I enjoy telling this story. I'll try and keep it short. This was a healthcare software company. They were based in the Midwest. They had a legacy product that was literally about 20 years old. And the culture in the company, they were located in a fairly rural area. So people at the company had been there a long time. They would get graduates coming out of a school nearby, and people would work at this company for 20 to 30 years. I would describe the culture as toxic. I'm not going to tell you who they are. In fact, they've been acquired several times, so they're not even a thing anymore, but they do live on. But it was a very fear-based culture. People really were worried about keeping their jobs. I wouldn't say there was a lot of innovation, and it was just a really negative place to work. And so they asked us to help them take this legacy product and bring it into kind of a more modern interface and style, and we really were rebuilding everything almost from the ground up. And the coolest experience I had was about the second or third, in Agile, if you're familiar with it, there's a concept called sprints or iterations, and basically it's a time box where you do work for a period of time, usually 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. We did our second or third sprint, and at the end of the sprint, everybody comes together and we often have what's called a demo or a showcase. And it's truly meant to be kind of a dog and pony show, that as the Agile team, you come out and you say, hey, look what we did. We've done some great work over the last couple of weeks. And there was a guy on our team, and he was quiet. He was your typical nerd. He would go home on weekends and play video games all weekend long. He wasn't really social at all. And everybody just thought he wasn't worth much on the team. He kept to himself. He didn't really contribute much. And I had even heard rumors that they were about to let him go. And so I watched this guy on this team blossom. The team kind of rallied around him, decided to pull him in. In our Agile planning sessions, we started asking him what he thought, asking him for his ideas. He had really good ideas. Nobody had ever really rallied around him as a team and started to pull ideas out of him. And within, that project lasted about 18 to 24 months, if I remember. By the end of that project, he was a key contributor. He was a key developer. He had contributed a number of really good ideas that had helped us solve big challenges. And I heard that after we disengaged, that a couple of years at that company, he was able to land a much better job in a much better corporate culture, making significantly more money. And I owe that, I believe, to Agile, because it was the team concept, it was us rallying around and pulling him in. So that's why I'm passionate about Agile. I've literally watched it change people's lives. I've also been a part of a well-performing Agile team, and frankly, that's when it gets fun. We've got two of our consultants here, JG in the orange shirt right there, and Damien in the blue shirt. And this is a moment here, I just want you to appreciate this. We have a French guy and a British guy sitting next to each other, getting along.
But we don't talk with them.
Yes.
There's a language barrier.
Yeah.
That channel tunnel.
JG, some of you have met JG before. He actually did our Lunch and Learn last month. I guess it was actually end of August, something like that. JG's an expert in analytics and data architecture, very senior consultant. Damien, on the other hand, is one of our Agile coaches. And so both of these guys in our community, I think most of us are pretty passionate about Agile because we see the good that it does. So that's enough about me, but that gives you a little bit of background of why I wanted to give a talk like this. So let's talk about Agile for those of you that haven't worked with it. So again, show of hands, who it feels like you're familiar with Agile, you know what it's about? Okay, that's great. I was hoping not so many people would raise their hands there. So, in its simplicity, you can go to agilemanifesto.org, and around 2000, a group of software professionals met in Utah, actually up at the Snowbird Ski Resort, and they sat down, and you can go to agilemanifesto.org if you'd like to read the story. I found it actually intriguing because they had come from all different walks and areas of the Agile or the software development world, and they sat down to say, let's kind of formalize some good ideas of how we think you can get software built better. And this, in a nutshell, is the Agile Manifesto. It's 4 points. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. So you can see there's a left half and a right half. And there's a paragraph underneath that says, what we're saying is, while we value the things on the right, we value the things on the left more. So they're not saying these things are bad, they're saying these things are first important, followed by these kinds of things. So a number of people that have never worked in the Agile environment would say that, well, Agile does away with all documentation and process. It's just a Wild West. That's not accurate. In fact, a well-running Agile organization will often have more process sometimes than a non-Agile organization. But that gives you kind of an intro into Agile. So also, to give us a bit of a framework to talk about, I want to introduce something that we talk about at Veracity that we've come to call the launch continuum. And this was designed around launching software. And basically, if you're launching software, you can kind of loosely group it into about 4 steps. You hopefully spend some time figuring out why you want to build something, do some market analysis, create a strategy. You go through a planning phase where you break it down and decide what's feasible. Then you actually begin to do the work and do the development. And at some point you send your baby out into the world, and then you work to get users to actually use it, and you gather feedback. And then a smart organization keeps doing this, and you get better, and you update, and you improve. Okay, so this is designed with software development in mind. And Agile, typically, when people think of Agile in software, they're usually thinking here. And maybe a little bit here in that you do, often teams will do some breakdown and planning of work and things like that. If we make a subtle change to the Agile Manifesto and we change working software to something like delivered value, I now have a pretty universal set of principles that is focused on people, delivering real value, getting those teams to work together, and embracing change. This is where we're back to that business agility concept I talked about. So for me, making a subtle change like this, all of a sudden it makes this far more universal. Really, we're talking about teams, solving challenges, getting real work finished, and embracing change, collaborating well, things like that. So that's kind of the direction we're going to head today. And then I'm going to do one more subtle change here. If we replace development and prep with the word execution, suddenly this continuum becomes far more universal as well. Because if you think about it, most initiatives, projects, those kinds of things go through a similar type of a cycle where you figure out what you're going to do, you break down the work, you actually do the work, you do whatever you do that is delivering that work, you get some feedback, and then often you iterate on that. So does that resonate? Okay. So this is important because this is where I'm starting to get this universal idea that I think we've got a set of principles that are applicable far beyond software development. So the challenge that we have is most people think that Agile software is just for software development. So I guess what I'm proposing is a bit of a mind shift of, okay, open your mind up, think a little differently. Those of you that aren't familiar with Agile, this might be easier for you than those of you that are familiar with Agile and have even used it, because I'm really asking you to think differently. Again, if you think about teams, most teams need to connect and collaborate. They need help staying focused. They need to estimate and size their tasks. They need to prioritize those tasks. Likewise, most teams probably could have better meetings. They need somebody to help them be accountable and keep things on schedule and be honest. Most teams get stuck occasionally, and they need help getting unstuck. And I think most workers and most teams want to learn and improve. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Agile leaders help teams in the software world solve these challenges all the time. So really all I'm saying is, well, if Agile leaders can do that in the software world, I think they can probably do it elsewhere. Agile leaders have a number of skills that they're focused on. They have a number of tools and methods for team dynamics and communication. Agile in and of itself focuses on personal accountability and the team owning the work and a good feedback loop. Agile has some good concepts and tools for sizing work and prioritizing your work. And Agile systems that now again are designed for tracking software work, but many of them could be adapted to track all kinds of work. And then Agile also, because of the feedback loop and the good communication, it helps teams stay focused on what they need to do, what's most important to get value out the door quickly, And hopefully the communication cycles help teams either get unstuck quickly or not get stuck in the first place. Agile leaders have a lot of tools that they use. There are a number of different Agile frameworks, but most of them prescribe, well, that's a strong word. They offer some good ideas. Damien would have corrected me if I said prescribe. They offer some good ideas for cadences for effective meetings and communication. There's patterns for good follow-up and good feedback. There's a lot of icebreakers, games, and good communication collaboration tools. If you find a good, Agile has a role called the Scrum Master, which is really a team facilitator. If you find a good Agile Scrum Master or Agile coach, you will find somebody that can usually run a very effective meeting, help people stay engaged in that meeting. As I mentioned with our developer that was quiet, that Agile team drew him in, and the Scrum Master had a big part in that. And then most Agilists also have a lot of lean thinking concepts, optimism. They're generally positive, excited people. Otherwise, they don't last in that role too long. Agile is all about trust and trusting that an individual wants to do a good job. And then usually there's a lot of creativity in there. So again, yes?
What do you mean by lean thinking? What does that mean?
So that is a great question, because the word lean can mean 100 different things to 100 different people. I think for me, when I say lean, I'm not usually using it in a formalized, Six Sigma kind of an expression. That's why I said, "Ooh, now I'm intimidated because we've got a black belt over here." But for me, lean is about efficient, effective. If you go back to the lean manufacturing concept, a lot of it was trimming down inventories just in time, helping to take a process that took this long, and how can we make it shorter? Maybe we deliver in smaller batches, things like that. So to me, all of those contribute to lean thinking. Does that answer the question, or is that helpful?
I'm going to deal with that.
Okay, all right.
Answer, so.
I've actually got some books later on in the deck that I'm going to talk about that have been useful. I don't think any of them are purely lean, but they all have lean concepts in them. And again, that for me is why I can look at Agile and see it as more universal, because as you bump into other frameworks, theory of constraints, lean, flow theory, product management theory, all of that stuff, you start to see common threads between them. And I see them as very complementary and often compatible, so that you can kind of see how they've cross-pollinated each other and how they might work together. So that's one reason why, for me, this is a pretty easy step for me to make. So again, just coming back to the Agile Manifesto, I think we've got a framework and some principles that can help people and teams deliver value, work together well, embracing change, emphasis on getting value out the door quickly. Let me give you a couple of examples in the real world that I have seen. So a healthcare analytics group. This is a group in a large healthcare network that services doctors' requests for special analytics and reporting. Now, truthfully, there is an element of this that is software development, because at the end of the day, most of the time you're going to have some kind of an analyst creating a report. So you could easily say, well, Scott, this is software development. But what I'd like to emphasize is that before you get to the report, there's a whole workflow upstream where these doctors' requests come in, and they were struggling because a request would come in, and I think the turnaround time was typically greater than 2 weeks. So you can imagine a doctor has an urgency, says, I really would like some kind of a report around this topic. And he puts the request, and okay, we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks and we'll let you know. Requests were getting lost. The quality of the work was questionable. And yet you had an analytics team that was much larger than teams that have successfully done this in other hospitals. So they had an innovative leader come in who found an innovative and out-of-the-box thinking Agile coach. They created a workflow up front, allowing a robust system to record the tasks coming in. Then every day They leveraged what they called a 5-minute triage. Now, traditionally, Agile has what we would call a 15-minute stand-up. They weren't afraid to modify that. They turned it into a focused 5-minute triage huddle. They divided these requests into 2 buckets. There were a number of them that they said, you know what, we could turn that around like in 2 days, 48 hours. Those are easy. So they threw those over into the 48-hour bucket. And then there were others that were going to take longer. So they had a short bucket and a long bucket. They actually divided themselves of their own thinking into 2 teams. They had the 48-hour rapid response team and the longer-term, more analytics development team. They focused on the flow and making sure that everything flowed through the system well. They focused on effective communication, had feedback loops, and improved themselves. And they have revolutionized this analytics department. And now, because they actually are a larger team, they're able to get far more throughput, not only than they were before, but teams of similar size. So the software development piece at the end, yeah, they used some Agile techniques there, but they used Agile communication principles, the focus on value and getting flow through the system. And the Agile coach that did this, I was really impressed. I heard them give a talk at a conference a couple of weeks ago. And I just complimented him. I said, I love that you're thinking outside of the box. I love that you didn't get hung up on your traditional stand-up and your traditional communications. And it's been really fun for them. I'll give another example of a state procurement department that, I don't remember their exact numbers. I was going to say, so this is a state, and this is the department that handles all the state's requests for comment or for proposals, so an RFP. And the typical turnaround time, it was like 18 months. It was crazy. Like, we need to get a website built for the state to help people search for jobs. And they would put the RFP out there, and then you march down the road. Before they even started work, it was literally like 18 months. It was just all these layers of red tape. And I'm not sure that there was an Agilist involved, but as I heard them talk, I thought somebody is bumping into Agile thinking, because one of the things that they did that really impressed me, Agile talks a lot about communicating with your end user. So in software, that's obviously the end person that's sitting in front of the computer using the app. And one of the typical breakdowns in the software world is you stop talking about here, either with the developer or the product person, and you don't actually go out in the field and engage with your user and get real-world user feedback. Well, they had a similar thing because they weren't necessarily collaborating with their users, but they also weren't collaborating with their vendors. It was this low-trust thing where they put out a huge specification in the RFP. It had very hard lines, do this, don't do that, whatever, and the vendors would come in, and they didn't really have to think much. They could go down the RFP and check the boxes, and yep, we can do this, and it's going to cost you about this much. Well, inevitably, when you're building things and products and whatever, you change as you go down the cycle. And so that meant there were change requests and all this expensive overhead that is in the typical procurement process. They've shortened that up. They've emphasized communication with the vendor. They took an RFP that would have been about like this and made it a lot more general. They said, vendor, you're the expert. You're the ones that know how to build websites. Here's kind of what we want. Dialogue with us and help us figure out not only what we think we want, but what we need, and you give us some good ideas how to do this better. The example that they gave was that they took this 18-month process. I think they accomplished it in 4 months. The vendor that did the work ended up, they paid half of what they thought they were going to be budgeted. And the vendor offered a number of innovative ideas that they never would have considered. So again, that may not feel too agile, but it's the collaboration and communication. It's focusing on the flow of work, bringing things down. They had regular iterative communications, both with the vendor doing the work during the process. So I see that as another agency taking these kinds of ideas. A couple other examples. I know of both financial and marketing teams that are actually, this is more upstream in the flow, but Agile and marketing teams that are actually doing projects much like you would do a software development project. They divide themselves into teams. They use Agile's concept of time boxing, where they run sprints of a couple of weeks. They have a planning session at the beginning of the sprint. They break their work down. They run for a bit. They may or may not have that showcase I talked about, but at the end of the sprint, they show what they've delivered. The focus is on what can we get all the way done in 2 weeks, and we'll deliver in a small batch. All of those are Agile concepts being used outside of the software development world. And then this is kind of on the fringe, but this one impressed me as well. There is a major pharma company that wanted to roll out some employee stress, anti-stress, I should say that, yeah, an employee stress program. That's just work. They wanted to roll out an anti-stress program, and it was focused on things like, look at your life. What's your diet like? Are you getting enough sleep? All this kind of stuff. And it was some really fun kind of stuff that we've probably all heard before, but they wanted to roll it out company-wide. And somebody had the idea of, we've got these Agile coaches that are really good with people. They're pretty good communicating. They're really motivating, because every time I talk to these people, they've got lots of energy. So they actually tapped their Agile coaches to design and help roll out this anti-stress program. And I met one of those coaches at a conference a couple months ago that I shared a similar talk at, and it was fascinating. And if I told you the name of the company, you would know. Every one of you, I'm sure, have consumed their products at least once in your life. And I thought that was really cool. So here's some examples of Agile outside of software. So again, if we come back to this continuum, we've talked about execution instead of just development, and it becomes far more universal. Let me give you some other examples of how we have used Agile outside of this. So if you have a project and you're getting started, oftentimes you kind of need to do some brainstorming at the beginning. And usually, at least for me, after we get a bunch of ideas on the table, then you kind of have to herd those ideas together and get your team aligned around, okay, we've just thrown out a bunch of stuff. Let's actually gel this and get it into a little bit more of a vision. And then once you get kind of your vision and some good ideas, then you actually get to the point where you start to break the work down and kind of make a work plan and a roadmap. And at Veracity, we've created some frameworks that we use in the software world to do this. So I'll just give you a frame of reference. In the planning space, we have what we call alignment and inception, which is basically, what's the vision? In the software world, and elsewhere, but especially in software, you'll see MVP. It's not most valuable person, it's minimum viable product. And it's basically saying, we want to build this huge, cool thing. We want to build a great new phone. And it's like, well, the phone should have 10 zillion features and it'll rule the world. You can never build something that way. So you've got to say, okay, what are we going to release first? That's what your MVP is. And then you begin to break the work down and you do some planning, you look at risk management, you say, do we have the right team? Do we have the right budget? Do we have the right architecture? Again, in the software world, we call this alignment and inception. And this is a process and a framework that we can take a team through in anywhere from, depending on the size of the project, 2 days to usually significantly less than a couple weeks. We can do a lot of good work in 2 to 4 days and knock out even a large project that's a couple years in size. If you step back one more and say, well, we're still in the brainstorming phase, you ask what lean is. Who's heard of Lean Startup? Eric Ries, anybody read the book? Okay, so Lean Startup is a book, you can find it, not the most entertaining reading, I will be honest, but great concepts. And Eric Ries puts out this loop that he calls build, measure, learn. And it's an idea for if you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a new company, the old idea used to be, we're going to go get gazillions of dollars of investment money because we have this wonderfully great idea, we've got gazillions of dollars, boom, we just jump in and start working. Lean Startup says, actually, you'll save a whole lot of money and time if you come up with a super lightweight prototype up front and you build something and you get some feedback from your audience, your end user, see how they like it, you learn and you keep going. And you do this kind of a very lightweight, low-cost loop just to test your product. Because, you know, if I said, I have a great idea for a new water bottle, it actually holds 50 gallons of water, and it's got wheels on it on a cart, so I can roll it around. And I think that's wonderful. Now, I don't think that's wonderful, and I doubt you buy that, right? But wouldn't it be good for me to get some market feedback before I build 1 million of my giant water bottles on a cart? So that's kind of what Lean Startup is all about. And we've taken those concepts and packaged them into what we call Lean Discovery, which is really just a workshop around that. Now again, all this is for software, but we have applied these concepts actually at Veracity when we are starting new initiatives. Now this is a meeting that happened about 2 weeks ago. Jack was actually a part of it. And we are talking internally of starting new elements of our practices at Veracity. And so myself and Jack and 2 of our other executive directors got together and we did 2 steps. We did an alignment and brainstorming step, and we just put the question to the room and we said, okay, so if we're going to do this and we're going to start these 3 new practices, what does that look like? What's it going to feel like? And we just started slapping ideas on the wall. And then we did that for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so probably. And then after a while, what you do is you write them down and you keep them at your desk. So everybody's got a stack of Post-it notes and they're writing their ideas. And then you say, okay, come put your ideas up on the wall. And so Jack would walk up and he'd say, well, I'm really passionate about strategy. And so I've got this idea here and I think that would be part of it and this would be part of it. And we need to do some market research and we're really going to have to figure out where we're going to find enough experts to support this work. And so we all go through our list of stuff and you get a bunch of sticky notes on the wall. And then you kind of look at them and go, okay, there's some natural groupings here. And that's what you see these kind of funny lines are, is we started to coalesce them into groups and then we drew boxes and said, well, what is this thing? Well, this is talent research. This is training. This is actually relates to process. This is what frameworks will we use. So now we've all gone through this process together and we have this vision of here's what it is we're trying to do and what we want to accomplish. This is not building software. This is building a consulting practice, right? So, but I'm using agile brainstorming methodologies to do that. Once we did this, then we said, okay, let's shift gears. This is on the wall. We have a kind of a vision for what we want to do. Let's draw a timeline. Now, there's columns here, but they didn't start out, we didn't worry about the columns at first. I just drew a timeline, kind of ad hoc. I said, well, the next 30 days, the next 90 days, the next 6 months, and then the rest of 2019. What would that look like? And we said, well, okay, so what are we going to have to do over the next 18 months? And we just started slapping ideas on the wall. And just like before, each of us comes up and says, I think we need to do some market research. Boom. I think we're going to need to update our website. Boom. So now we have a set of tasks that's just kind of all over. And we tried to loosely group them chronologically. And then like we did over here, we said, okay, what are the natural groupings? And we came up with ideas. We said, well, this kind of stuff relates to sales and marketing. This over here is research that we need to do. And this is actually more of a formalized plan. This relates to people and skill sets. These are actually deliverables and artifacts that we need to create. We did this exercise in about 2.5 hours, and by the time we were done, we've got an 18-month preliminary roadmap for launching a set of new practices at Veracity.
Can I add to that, Scott?
Absolutely.
One of the most interesting things of this exercise was, you have me, I come from a strategy management consulting background, software development background.
Speak up, I don't know.
Sorry, software development background. We had a guy who basically came from a sales and marketing, digital media background, and then in analytics, and these were all executives in the company, but all very, very broad ways, and there are no rules really on this other than just write your stuff down on a piece of paper. And so as we were going, we were really coming at practice development from very, very disparate angles, or so I thought. Once you started slapping them up on the paper, it was like, it's kind of all kind of aligned, and we really hadn't talked about it because I'm here, they're in Utah, we haven't come together as a group yet. So we did all this completely ad hoc, and I was able to actually put a presentation together for our leadership team based off of this, just from memory more or less, and then taking a look at some of the sticky notes and things that we had, and was able to slap out a deck in a couple of hours and really put some meat behind it. So really cool technique that I didn't walk away, or didn't come to Salt Lake that week expecting to walk away with a plan, and we did. So it was pretty cool. And I've seen this work now at least 3 other companies that we've done this at. So, and he mentioned the alignment and inception, similar concepts too, when you're coming up with stories and coming up with features, if you're familiar with Agile, very similar concepts. So anyway.
Yeah, so the inception is basically a deeper version of what I just showed you that takes place over a couple of days. You actually begin to create your high-level initiatives. These are the big rocks, and then you begin to break them down into smaller initiatives. Eventually you might get to task level. You begin to kind of prioritize things and say, what are the things that we must have, what would be nice to have, what are the things that we shouldn't try to do right now, and then you actually size them. These are the really big tasks, these are the medium-sized tasks, these are the small tasks. You can begin to assign the work. All that is a part of this inception idea. And keep in mind, this did come from the software development world, but really all we're doing is saying, you know, these are great principles and people have to get work done, and you can apply them elsewhere. So it's fun, and I would add too that this process, we didn't sit down and go, what's a great way to do what we're trying to do? This was kind of an experimental thing that we just started trying a couple times. Again, Agile emphasizes do something in a little bite, learn from it. There's a lot of frameworks that emphasize that. That's all we did, and eventually after we started to do this a few times, we start seeing patterns of this worked well, this didn't work well, let's improve it. Every time we do it, I think it gets a little bit better.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So if you're bringing in those frameworks, where's your customer perspective on what you're trying to make happen?
Okay, so for this was all internal work right now. This was just, I guess our client would be my boss, the CEO, who had said, hey, we need to start fleshing out how we can do some new practices. She's been a CFO, so she tends to be very financially oriented. She's also better than I am in a lot of these frameworks. She's done manufacturing. She started out as a management consultant with Bain, so pretty high bar. When you give her a strategic plan, it needs to have some meat on it. It needs to have a roadmap. You need to show how you've really thought this through. And so really, she was kind of our customer here. And so we've iterated over time, knowing that she likes a high-level vision. She likes to make sure the team's aligned, and she wants this kind of output. And this is something that for me, well actually, you know what I remember? She was in the first meeting that we did this with, that I did this with. And when we got from here to here, I remember saying, okay, so we got some great ideas. Where are we going to go from here? And she said, well, we need some kind of a timeline. We said, okay. So we just drew kind of a timeline on the wall and then just started running, and it kind of presented itself. And then as we did it a few more times, we thought, there's really a good pattern here. You can do this. So does that answer your question or help?
Well, it does. The other aspect of what I was thinking about this is that you're effectively driving out many products there in terms of your strategy practices. And so those strategy practices in and of themselves have some alignment and definition and potential market.
Yes.
That would help you with prioritization, and then you talk about finances, the revenue coming in. So you actually have something that seems to be continuing to move in a direction where an agile way of looking at that might prioritize where you spend your time.
Definitely.
And effort.
This whole column here is research, and you notice it's weighted to the front. So one of the things that Jo, who's more of our analytics person, she will have the analytics practice. She is very passionate about research, having an analytics background, and so she quickly identified we need to know what the market is. We're going to have to go look at competitive analysis and what does the market want and all this. So, absolutely.
Right, and Marcia, like the presentation I mentioned that came from this was sort of, okay, I need to tease out my piece, which is strategy and transformation, And that's a really big, broad topic, and one of the first things I put in there, that we're talking IT transformation, business transformation, all the kinds of questions that as an executive team, we all need to consider, because we can either be huge, or we can be really tight-knit and focused. I'm a framework person, right? I came from management consulting. I like easy, repeatable processes. So for me, if you look back at one of the columns there, I have like framework, all these, CMMI, or Agile, you name whatever you can. I want to leverage something like that. So again, Joe's research, I'm like, that's good, but I'm going to research frameworks and have a repeatable process. And we all came at this from very different perspectives, but I think all geared toward our customer in mind.
So we talked a little bit about brainstorming and planning. There's a feedback loop at the end of this cycle too, where you put something out into the wild and hopefully somebody's using it or responding to it. You need to listen and get feedback. Agile has this feedback loop built in with its internal team, in that I've talked about doing demos, and at the end of your sprint you typically do what's called a retrospective, where you sit with the team and say what went well, what didn't go well, what should we start doing, what should we stop doing. Those same kinds of things, I propose, can be used to get feedback from your users. And again, a Scrum Master or an Agile coach who is used to leading that kind of a conversation, real emphasis on listening. Damien, when you do a retrospective, I've seen you do a couple of them, but usually you won't even let me in, because you try to make it as a quiet, personal thing for the team where it's a safe environment. How important is listening as a skill in those?
It's huge. I mean, I think you spend more time listening than almost anything else, because you want people to feel comfortable and listen to the conversations that are going on. And you're observing as a Scrum Master, as Agile coach. And then you're facilitating, I use that word a lot in Agile, but then you facilitate the conversation to go forward. Again, it's very crucial.
So if you're getting feedback from your end users, you heard listening, observing, and facilitating, not so much talking, right? Really, that's what this feedback loop is. So we've now talked all the way around this continuum or cycle of getting work done, and I'm proposing that I think Agile can help you all along that direction. So let me give you some high-level tips for success. And this is where those of you that are really down in the meat of some of this, you might go away wanting, because I'm going to stay high level. Happy to talk with you afterwards. So some ideas for success. And some of these I think are fundamental with almost any project anyway, but I think they relate especially if you're going to work with Agile folks in an Agile manner. You really need to figure out your why. Now, this is such a common assertion, and you'll hear it all over the place, so you need to know what your why is. And yet, it's so easy to skip. So things like, we really need to know the root problem we're trying to solve here. Or we really need to identify what is the real thing, the root value that we're trying to deliver. Or if we're thinking in terms of our end user or our customer, what does success look like to them? Not just me, whew, I got my project done, whoo, success. That's not necessarily success. It's, did my end customer, whether it's an internal customer, external customer, the consumer of whatever it is I'm creating, did they think we succeeded? That's success. Because if I just got the report done and dropped it on my boss's desk and went, whew, we're done here, that, I did a lot of work, but it doesn't mean I actually accomplished anything. So figure out your why. Secondly, again, goes without saying, don't try to boil the ocean. If you want to try this in your company, keep it simple, start small, and I'd suggest that you're kind of subtle about it. I wouldn't make a giant announcement. We are using Agile for everything now. In fact, I actually have another slide just on that idea. I would say, pick a team or a small initiative or something that is fairly simple, that looks like they might be able to use some help, and then find the Agile coach or Agile leader that you want to help them, and then just maybe introduce them to the team and say, hey, Susie here is just going to help you facilitate your next meeting. See how that goes. So start small, don't make a big announcement, don't try to make a huge cultural change. Find the right Agile leader. Now, if you don't have Agile people in your company, this might be a different challenge. Veracity would be happy to help you with that, either providing some on a consultant basis or helping you train up some of your own. If you do have some Agile folks in your company, here's some characteristics I would look for. Don't find somebody that really loves process and checking all the boxes and rigid lines. Find somebody who's more principle-based. Because really that's what you need to succeed in what we're talking about. We're saying there's lots of great process, you might have to break it. That's okay. Find somebody who's coached teams for a while. This is not generally a beginner space because you're innovating. Doesn't mean a beginner can't have success, right? Find somebody that likes a challenge because anything worth doing usually is kind of a challenge. So have them, somebody that embraces challenge. Find somebody with really good communication and soft skills. A good Scrum Master has amazing soft skills. Damien could tell you your baby's ugly and you would love him for it.
That's the accent.
Not quite.
I don't know if I go that far.
That's the accent.
Agile is working with people, but isn't that what getting work done usually is working with people, right? So you're really finding somebody that has good people skills, they're comfortable going outside the box. Finding the right leader to do this is key. This goes back to the don't call it Agile, just keep it generic. If somebody asks, great, you can say Agile. Sometimes, even in the software world, Agile's pretty ubiquitous these days. But we still bump into companies that are like, yeah, we tried Agile once, it didn't work well at all, so we don't want any of that Agile stuff. And it's pretty common that we kind of have to go in undercover, because usually what will happen is you'll have a company that has that culture. A new leader will join that company from outside. Maybe it's a CIO or a vice president of development. And they've used Agile, they love Agile, and they'll call Veracity and say, guys, I need you to help me get some Agile in here. And we'll go in undercover, and we won't call it Agile. We'll just start having meetings and changing the way meetings work. And about 2 months in, all of a sudden, poof, hey, did you guys know you're doing Agile? So I would encourage you to take kind of an undercover approach there. Now, that may not be a big deal. If people aren't familiar with Agile, that's fine. But also, you're breaking this software development stigma, too, that Agile only belongs over here in the software world. So your mileage may vary there, but I would share that. Again, focus on the goal and what you're trying to do, not the process. So focus on where you want to get to, not the road of how to get there. And, this all builds on itself, right? An innovative leader will just naturally kind of do these things, but don't get hung up on process. I would say that if you define your why, the what and the how will kind of start to present itself. This last one is really just believe that this can work. Think outside of the box, have fun with this, brainstorm, see it as an experiment, not as this giant initiative. Start small with one team, try something. If it doesn't work, iterate, pivot, try again. This stuff will work. I've seen it work because it's not so much about software development, it's just helping people work well together. Here's some ideas for additional thought on this. This is always an interesting exercise. Who has read one of the books on this list? Okay. Who's read 2? 3, 4. How many do I have?
No, 4.
6. Anybody read all of them? Anybody read 5? Oh, awesome. You get the prize, man. So these are different books, and these are not Agile books. These are books that I see as very complementary to Agile. Patrick Lencioni is a favorite of mine just because his books are easy to read. They're often fables or allegories, so you're reading a story and learning. My problem is he usually has, after the story ends, which is usually about 3/4 of the way through the book, then he gets into the really meaty stuff and it's not a story anymore, and I kind of stop reading there sometimes, but just being honest. This is all about teams and getting teams to work well, having effective meetings. This is Ken Blanchard's, I think it's one of his signature works about a concept he calls situational leadership. Just good leadership principles. This, John Cotter, is all about leading change in an organization and breaking change down and how you get large cultures to begin to change over time, which is not for the faint of heart. The Goal, Ellie Goldratt. This is required reading in a lot of MBA programs. And it's a book that originally is aimed at manufacturing and things like going back to Toyota and lean and all of that. This is one of those that I would say relates to lean thinking. But he puts forth what's called the theory of constraints, which is all about flow and helping things flow through a system. If you look at the concepts of what an Agile framework called Scrum, you will see lots of theory of constraint principles in there. And then last one, who's read Drive? Okay, so Drive by Daniel Pink, there is an 8-minute talk you can find. There's a TED talk that's longer, but somebody put it into 8 minutes and did like a whiteboard sketch note that is really helpful. And Daniel Pink basically talks about when you're working with knowledge workers, they are motivated completely differently. And it talks about motivating them with trusting them to do the work, giving them autonomy, believing that they want to do good work, the principle of mastery, and giving them a bigger vision and a why, which is relates to purpose. So all of these books I would recommend you read, and if you read them, you will start to see how not only Agile fits in here, but good ideas for working with teams. So we're on the home stretch here. You know, the premise is you've got teams in your organization that need help. I believe that you have Agile leaders in your organization that may be able to help. If you don't have Agile leaders, I'd love to talk with you about that. But we've talked about some ideas of how you can use Agile in all stages of getting something done. And I would say don't limit yourself by what I've said. Hopefully that's self-evident, that really we're talking about brainstorming and kind of naturally going out of the box. I'd encourage you to read some of those books. This presentation will be available, and so I'm happy to mail this out to you. And you may find at some point that you'd like some additional coaching or resources. At Veracity, we'd be happy to help you with that. We can help you depending on the nature of your company and your domain. We can help you at all stages along this. Everything from planning and strategy and alignment to coaching and training, things like this. We've got some product management specialists. We have some great software architects, developers that can help you solve thorny technological problems. We're passionate, we think we're experts, and we really love what we do. So, thanks for coming. Hopefully this will help you change your world a little.